Question 1. The performance metrics show a consistent, albeit minor, decline in the efficiency of a key transmission substation operated by National Grid. Which approach best addresses this situation from a risk management perspective, considering regulatory compliance and operational integrity? Option A. Conduct a superficial review of the performance data to identify the most obvious contributing factors and implement a quick fix to restore efficiency to previous levels. Option B. Initiate a detailed risk assessment to understand the root causes of the efficiency decline, evaluate potential impacts on network reliability and safety, and develop a proportionate mitigation plan in line with regulatory guidance. Option C. Implement immediate cost-saving measures to offset the projected financial impact of the efficiency decline, deferring further investigation until a more opportune time. Option D. Rely on historical performance data to predict future trends, and assume the current decline is within acceptable operational tolerances without further investigation. The correct answer is B. Initiate a detailed risk assessment to understand the root causes of the efficiency decline, evaluate potential impacts on network reliability and safety, and develop a proportionate mitigation plan in line with regulatory guidance. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational efficiency with regulatory compliance and the ethical imperative to protect critical infrastructure. National Grid, as a vital utility, operates under stringent regulatory oversight designed to ensure public safety and service reliability. A failure to adequately assess and mitigate risks associated with performance deviations could lead to service disruptions, safety incidents, or breaches of regulatory obligations, all of which carry significant financial and reputational consequences. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between minor fluctuations and systemic issues that demand immediate attention and robust risk management. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive risk assessment framework that aligns with National Grid's regulatory obligations. This means not just identifying performance deviations, but systematically evaluating their potential impact, likelihood, and the adequacy of existing controls. It requires engaging relevant stakeholders, documenting the assessment process, and developing proportionate mitigation strategies, all within the established regulatory guidelines for critical infrastructure management. This approach ensures that National Grid meets its duty of care and complies with its license conditions and statutory duties, such as those under the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974 and the Electricity Act 1989, by prioritizing safety and reliability. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction without a thorough risk assessment fails to acknowledge the potential for cascading failures and their impact on public safety and service continuity. This overlooks the regulatory expectation for robust risk management and could lead to breaches of license conditions requiring adequate systems and controls. Another incorrect approach that relies on historical data alone without considering current operational context or emerging threats neglects the dynamic nature of risk and the need for adaptive management strategies. This can result in a false sense of security and leave National Grid vulnerable to unforeseen events, potentially violating the duty to maintain a safe and reliable supply. An approach that prioritizes speed of response over thoroughness risks superficial fixes that do not address root causes, thereby perpetuating underlying vulnerabilities and failing to meet the rigorous standards expected by regulators like Ofgem. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape and National Grid's specific obligations. When performance metrics deviate, the first step is to trigger a risk assessment process. This involves defining the scope, identifying potential hazards and risks, analyzing their likelihood and impact, and evaluating existing controls. Based on this analysis, appropriate mitigation actions are determined and implemented, with ongoing monitoring and review. This structured, risk-based approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with both operational needs and regulatory requirements. Question 2. When evaluating potential risks to National Grid's electricity transmission network, which approach best demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance and operational integrity? Option A. Implementing risk management processes only in response to regulatory directives or after an incident has occurred. Option B. Relying primarily on past incident reports to identify risks, assuming that future threats will mirror historical patterns. Option C. Focusing risk mitigation efforts exclusively on those risks that present the most immediate and quantifiable cost savings for National Grid. Option D. A comprehensive risk assessment that considers historical data, emerging threats, and potential impacts on safety, environment, and service continuity, leading to the development of layered mitigation strategies. The correct answer is D. A comprehensive risk assessment that considers historical data, emerging threats, and potential impacts on safety, environment, and service continuity, leading to the development of layered mitigation strategies. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for National Grid employees involved in risk assessment due to the inherent complexity of energy infrastructure and the stringent regulatory environment. Balancing operational efficiency with safety and environmental protection requires careful judgment, as failures can have severe consequences, including service disruption, financial penalties, reputational damage, and harm to the public and environment. The need to identify and mitigate potential risks proactively is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and comprehensive risk assessment that integrates both quantitative and qualitative methodologies. This approach is right because it aligns with the principles of robust risk management expected within the regulated utility sector. Specifically, it necessitates identifying potential hazards, analyzing their likelihood and impact, and developing appropriate mitigation strategies. This aligns with the overarching regulatory duty of care to ensure the safety and reliability of the energy network, as often stipulated in frameworks governing critical infrastructure and utility operations. It also reflects best practice in corporate governance and operational resilience, ensuring that National Grid can anticipate and respond effectively to a wide range of potential disruptions. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on historical data without considering emerging threats or technological advancements is an incorrect approach. This failure neglects the dynamic nature of risks, such as those posed by cyber threats or climate change, which may not be adequately represented in past incidents. It can lead to a false sense of security and leave National Grid vulnerable to novel risks. Prioritizing only cost-saving measures over potential safety or environmental impacts is also an incorrect approach. This demonstrates a failure to uphold the fundamental ethical and regulatory obligations to protect public safety and the environment. Such a narrow focus can lead to underinvestment in critical safety systems or preventative maintenance, increasing the likelihood of incidents and potentially resulting in significant regulatory sanctions and public backlash. Adopting a reactive approach, addressing risks only after they have materialized, is fundamentally flawed. This approach fails to meet the proactive risk management expectations of regulatory bodies and industry best practices. It is inefficient, often more costly to rectify issues post-incident, and carries a higher risk of severe consequences due to the lack of preparedness. Professional reasoning. Professionals at National Grid should employ a structured risk management framework. This involves establishing clear risk appetite statements, conducting regular and thorough risk identification exercises, performing robust risk analysis, considering both likelihood and impact, evaluating risks against established criteria, and implementing effective risk treatment plans. Continuous monitoring, review, and reporting are essential to ensure the framework remains relevant and effective. This process should be embedded within the organizational culture, encouraging open communication about risks and fostering a proactive mindset. Question 3. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual fluctuation in energy flow within a critical section of National Grid's transmission network. What is the most appropriate initial approach to managing this situation? Option A. Immediately initiate a full network shutdown to prevent any potential cascading failure. Option B. Implement minor operational adjustments to compensate for the fluctuation without a formal assessment. Option C. Ignore the fluctuation as it is likely a sensor error and wait for further data. Option D. Conduct a detailed risk assessment to understand the nature, likelihood, and potential impact of the anomaly before deciding on a course of action. Correct answer is A. Immediately initiate a full network shutdown to prevent any potential cascading failure. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires National Grid to balance operational efficiency with regulatory compliance and the safety of its infrastructure and the public. The monitoring system's anomaly detection necessitates a prompt and accurate risk assessment to determine the appropriate response, ensuring that any potential threat to the network is mitigated without causing undue disruption or incurring unnecessary costs. The decision-making process must be grounded in established risk management principles and adhere strictly to the regulatory framework governing critical national infrastructure in the UK. The correct approach involves a systematic and evidence-based risk assessment that prioritizes safety and regulatory adherence. This means thoroughly investigating the anomaly, evaluating its potential impact on National Grid's operations and the wider energy network, and implementing proportionate mitigation measures. This aligns with the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974, which places a general duty on employers to ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, the health, safety, and welfare at work of all their employees and others who may be affected by their undertaking. Furthermore, it aligns with the principles of the Office of Gas and Electricity Markets, OFGEM, regarding the safe and reliable operation of energy networks, which often requires robust risk management frameworks and incident response protocols. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the anomaly without proper investigation. This failure to act could contravene the duty of care under the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974, and potentially violate specific regulations enforced by OFGEM concerning network integrity and security. Another incorrect approach is to overreact and implement costly, disruptive measures without a clear understanding of the actual risk. This could lead to inefficient resource allocation and potentially violate principles of good governance and economic regulation, as OFGEM expects regulated entities to operate efficiently. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy in the risk assessment, leading to potentially flawed conclusions and inappropriate actions, would also be professionally unacceptable, as it undermines the reliability and safety objectives mandated by regulatory bodies. Professionals should employ a structured risk assessment framework, such as identifying the hazard, the anomaly, analyzing the risk, likelihood, and consequence, evaluating the risk, determining acceptability, and treating the risk, implementing controls. This process should be iterative and informed by expert judgment, operational data, and relevant regulatory guidance. When faced with an anomaly, the decision-making process should involve 1. Immediate verification of the anomaly. 2. A rapid but thorough risk assessment. 3. Consultation with relevant internal experts and potentially external bodies if required by regulation. 4. Implementation of proportionate control measures. And 5. Documentation and review of the incident and response. Question 4. Analysis of a situation where an external community group, citing anecdotal evidence of unusual network activity, raises concerns about potential safety risks associated with a National Grid substation. The substation's operational data shows no anomalies, and internal checks have not identified any immediate issues. What is the most appropriate approach for National Grid to take in response to these concerns? Option A. Inform the community group that operational data shows no anomalies and that internal checks have found no issues. Therefore, no further action is required beyond continuing standard operational monitoring. Option B. Conduct a formal, documented risk assessment involving relevant internal departments and, where appropriate, engage with the community group to understand their specific observations, while also reviewing existing safety protocols and considering any potential, albeit unconfirmed, risks. Option C. Initiate an immediate, unscheduled system-wide diagnostic and upgrade of the substation's equipment to proactively address any potential, unspecified risks, regardless of current performance data. Option D. Delegate the assessment of the community group's concerns to the Public Relations Department to manage external communication and provide a standard reassuring statement without a detailed technical review. The correct answer is B. Conduct a formal, documented risk assessment involving relevant internal departments and, where appropriate, engage with the community group to understand their specific observations, while also reviewing existing safety protocols and considering any potential, albeit unconfirmed, risks. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for National Grid employees due to the inherent risks associated with critical infrastructure and the regulatory imperative to maintain safety and reliability. The challenge lies in balancing operational efficiency with robust risk assessment, especially when faced with potential external influences that could compromise established safety protocols. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all identified risks are adequately mitigated. Adhering strictly to the national grid's internal policies and relevant UK regulatory frameworks. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and documented risk assessment process that prioritizes the safety of the public and national grid personnel, as well as the integrity of the network. This approach aligns with the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974, which places a general duty on employers to ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, the health, safety, and welfare at work of all their employees, and also to conduct their undertaking in such a way as to ensure that persons not in their employment are not exposed to risks to their health or safety. Furthermore, it reflects the principles of the Office of Gas and Electricity Markets (OFGEM) regulatory framework, which mandates that licensees must manage their networks safely and reliably, including through effective risk management. A thorough assessment would involve identifying potential hazards, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and implementing appropriate control measures with a clear audit trail. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the concerns raised by the external stakeholder without a formal risk assessment. This failure to engage with potential risks, even if they appear to originate from an external, non-technical source, contravenes the duty of care and proactive risk management expected under UK health and safety legislation and OFGEM's requirements. It suggests a disregard for potential vulnerabilities and a lack of due diligence. Another incorrect approach would be to conduct a superficial assessment that only considers immediate operational impacts, neglecting broader safety or security implications. This would be a failure to meet the comprehensive nature of risk assessment mandated by regulatory bodies, which often require consideration of a wide range of potential risks, including those that might not be immediately obvious or directly related to day-to-day operations. Finally, an approach that prioritizes expediency over thoroughness, leading to the implementation of unverified or inadequate mitigation measures, would also be professionally unacceptable. This bypasses the essential steps of risk evaluation and control validation, potentially leaving the network exposed to significant harm and violating the principles of responsible asset management and regulatory compliance. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with acknowledging all reported concerns, regardless of their source. This should be followed by a structured risk assessment process, adhering to established methodologies and regulatory guidance. The process should involve cross-functional collaboration, clear documentation, and a commitment to implementing and monitoring effective control measures. When in doubt, seeking guidance from senior management or relevant subject matter experts within National Grid and consulting applicable regulatory guidance is paramount. Question 5. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual pressure fluctuation in a key gas transmission pipeline operated by National Grid, exceeding predefined alert thresholds but not immediately indicating a catastrophic failure. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action from a risk assessment perspective? Option A. Initiate a full system shutdown and isolation of the affected pipeline section, pending a detailed investigation and regulatory notification. Option B. Continue normal operations, monitor the fluctuation closely, and only escalate if the deviation significantly worsens or a secondary alert is triggered. Option C. Temporarily override the alert threshold to allow continued operation while scheduling a routine inspection for the next maintenance cycle. Option D. Immediately dispatch a field team to visually inspect the pipeline section and gather on-site data before any further decisions are made. The correct answer is A. Initiate a full system shutdown and isolation of the affected pipeline section, pending a detailed investigation and regulatory notification. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational efficiency with the paramount importance of regulatory compliance and public safety. National Grid, as a critical infrastructure operator, faces stringent regulatory oversight, and any deviation from established safety protocols or reporting requirements can have severe consequences, including significant fines, reputational damage, and potential harm to the public. The pressure to maintain service continuity while adhering to complex regulations necessitates a robust risk assessment framework. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, data-driven risk assessment that prioritizes immediate safety concerns and regulatory reporting. This approach is right because it directly addresses the potential hazards identified by the monitoring system, aligns with the proactive safety culture expected of utility companies, and ensures adherence to regulatory mandates for incident reporting and mitigation. Specifically, it reflects the principles of robust risk management embedded within UK regulatory frameworks governing energy infrastructure, which emphasize identifying, assessing, and controlling risks to prevent harm and ensure reliable service delivery. This includes adhering to reporting obligations under relevant legislation and industry codes of practice. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate operational restoration without a thorough risk assessment fails to acknowledge the potential for cascading failures or underlying systemic issues. This approach is ethically and regulatorily unsound, as it prioritizes short-term expediency over long-term safety and compliance, potentially violating duties of care and specific reporting requirements. Another incorrect approach that delays reporting or downplays the significance of the anomaly, even if it appears minor, is also professionally unacceptable. This can lead to a breach of regulatory obligations that mandate timely and accurate reporting of deviations or incidents. Such a failure undermines transparency and the ability of regulators to oversee safety and operational integrity, potentially leading to more severe consequences if the issue escalates. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a structured risk assessment methodology. This includes 1. Immediate identification and containment of the potential hazard. 2. Thorough investigation to understand the root cause and potential impact. 3. Evaluation of risks against established safety and regulatory standards. 4. Implementation of appropriate mitigation and corrective actions. And 5. Timely and accurate reporting to relevant authorities and stakeholders as dictated by regulatory frameworks. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and prioritize safety and compliance. Question 6. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual fluctuation in pressure readings within a critical section of National Grid's gas transmission network. This anomaly is outside the typical operational variance but has not yet triggered any automated safety alarms. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action? Option A. Ignore the anomaly, assuming it is a transient sensor error, and continue normal operations. Option B. Conduct an immediate, detailed investigation to correlate the pressure fluctuation with other operational data, historical trends, and potential external factors before escalating. Option C. Initiate a full system shutdown of the affected section to prevent any potential safety hazard. Option D. Immediately notify senior management and the relevant regulatory bodies without any preliminary assessment of the anomaly. The correct answer is C. Initiate a full system shutdown of the affected section to prevent any potential safety hazard. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an immediate and informed response to a potential breach of regulatory compliance within National Grid's operations. The challenge lies in accurately identifying the root cause of the anomaly and selecting the most appropriate course of action that aligns with regulatory obligations and operational integrity, without causing undue disruption or misinterpreting the data. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between a minor fluctuation and a significant risk. The correct approach involves a systematic investigation to understand the context and nature of the anomaly. This entails correlating the observed data with known operational parameters, historical performance, and potential external factors. The goal is to determine if the anomaly represents a genuine risk to safety, security, or regulatory compliance. If a potential breach is identified, the subsequent steps must involve reporting the incident through established internal channels and potentially to the relevant regulatory bodies as mandated by law. This approach is correct because it prioritizes a thorough understanding of the situation before taking action, ensuring that responses are proportionate and compliant. Specifically, under the UK regulatory framework governing energy infrastructure, such as that overseen by the Office of Gas and Electricity Markets, Ofgem, and potentially the Health and Safety Executive, HSE, there is a clear expectation for operators like National Grid to have robust systems for monitoring performance and to report any deviations that could indicate a safety, security, or environmental risk. This proactive and investigative stance is ethically sound and legally mandated to maintain public trust and operational integrity. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate system shutdown without further investigation is professionally unacceptable. This is because it could lead to unnecessary operational disruption, significant financial losses, and potential reputational damage for National Grid, all without a confirmed breach. Such an action fails to demonstrate due diligence and a reasoned assessment of risk, potentially violating principles of operational efficiency and proportionality expected by regulators. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the anomaly assuming it is a false positive, is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a failure to adhere to the principle of better safe than sorry and a disregard for potential regulatory breaches. If the anomaly does indicate a genuine issue, ignoring it could lead to severe consequences, including safety incidents, environmental damage, and substantial penalties from regulatory authorities. This approach neglects the duty of care and the obligation to maintain compliance with all applicable laws and guidelines. A third incorrect approach, which is to immediately escalate to senior management without any initial assessment, bypasses the established internal reporting and investigation protocols. While escalation is important, doing so without a preliminary understanding of the anomaly's nature and potential impact can overwhelm management with unsubstantiated concerns. This can lead to inefficient resource allocation and a failure to address the actual issue promptly and effectively, undermining the structured risk management processes expected of a company like National Grid. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This typically includes identifying the anomaly, gathering relevant data, assessing the potential impact and likelihood of a breach, determining the appropriate response based on the assessment, implementing the response, and documenting all actions and findings. This process ensures that decisions are data-driven, compliant with regulation, and aligned with the company's operational and ethical standards. Question 7. Research into potential vulnerabilities in National Grid's electricity transmission network has identified several areas of concern. Considering the UK's regulatory framework for energy infrastructure, which of the following approaches to addressing these identified risks best demonstrates professional due diligence and regulatory compliance for National Grid? Option A. Rely solely on historical incident data to identify and address risks, assuming that past patterns will accurately predict future threats. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that integrates potential environmental impacts, operational vulnerabilities, and regulatory compliance requirements, informing strategic investment and mitigation plans. Option C. Outsource the entire risk assessment process to an external consultancy, accepting their findings without significant internal review or validation. Option D. Implement immediate cost-saving measures to reduce operational expenditure, deferring detailed risk assessments until a later financial period. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that integrates potential environmental impacts, operational vulnerabilities, and regulatory compliance requirements, informing strategic investment and mitigation plans. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because National Grid, as a critical infrastructure operator, faces stringent regulatory oversight and public scrutiny. Decisions regarding risk assessment must not only be technically sound, but also demonstrably compliant with the relevant regulatory framework, which in this context is the UK's regulatory regime for energy networks, overseen by bodies like Ofgem. The challenge lies in balancing operational efficiency and investment with the paramount duty to ensure the safety, security, and reliability of the energy supply, all while adhering to specific legal and regulatory obligations. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, proactive, and data-driven risk assessment that integrates potential environmental impacts, operational vulnerabilities, and regulatory compliance requirements. This approach is right because it aligns with the principles of robust risk management expected of utility companies under UK regulations. Specifically, it reflects the duty of care mandated by legislation such as the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974, and the environmental protection duties under the Environmental Protection Act 1990, as well as the specific requirements of energy sector regulators like Ofgem, which emphasizes the need for companies to manage risks effectively to ensure network resilience and consumer protection. A thorough assessment allows for informed decision-making on mitigation strategies and investment priorities, ensuring that National Grid meets its statutory and regulatory obligations. An approach that prioritizes immediate cost savings over a thorough risk assessment is professionally unacceptable because it risks contravening regulatory requirements for safety and reliability. This could lead to potential breaches of licenses granted by Ofgem, fines, and reputational damage. Fails to uphold the duty of care to the public and employees, potentially exposing them to harm. An approach that focuses solely on historical data without considering emerging risks or future projections is also professionally flawed. Regulatory frameworks often require forward-looking risk management. Failing to anticipate future threats, such as climate change impacts or evolving cyber threats, means national grid may not be adequately prepared, leading to potential service disruptions and non-compliance with future regulatory expectations. An approach that delegates risk assessment entirely to external consultants without internal oversight or validation is problematic. While external expertise is valuable, National Grid retains ultimate responsibility for its risk management processes and compliance. A lack of internal engagement can lead to a disconnect between the assessment and operational realities, potentially resulting in recommendations that are impractical or do not fully capture the company's specific context and regulatory obligations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk management framework that is embedded within the organization's culture and operations. This framework should include clear identification of risks, assessment of their likelihood and impact, evaluation of existing controls, and development of mitigation strategies. Crucially, it must be informed by the specific regulatory requirements of the sector and jurisdiction, with regular review and updates to ensure ongoing compliance and effectiveness. Internal expertise should be leveraged, supplemented by external advice where necessary, and all decisions must be demonstrably aligned with the company's legal and ethical obligations. Question 8. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a potential failure in a critical component of National Grid's electricity transmission network could lead to widespread power outages. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory requirements and professional best practice for managing this identified risk? Option A. Prioritizing mitigation efforts based solely on the frequency of minor, unrelated incidents observed in other network segments. Option B. Documenting the risk and deferring mitigation efforts until a failure actually occurs to avoid unnecessary expenditure. Option C. Conducting a limited assessment focusing only on the immediate financial impact of a potential outage without fully evaluating the broader safety and regulatory implications. Option D. Implementing immediate, albeit costly, redundant systems for the identified critical component to ensure continuous operation and minimize outage probability. The correct answer is D. Implementing immediate, albeit costly, redundant systems for the identified critical component to ensure continuous operation and minimize outage probability. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because National Grid, as a critical infrastructure operator, faces significant regulatory scrutiny and public expectation regarding the safety and reliability of its operations. A robust risk assessment is not merely a procedural step, but a fundamental component of its license to operate and its commitment to public safety. The challenge lies in identifying and prioritizing risks that could impact service delivery, environmental integrity, and the safety of employees and the public, all within the stringent framework of UK regulations governing the energy sector. Careful judgment is required to balance operational efficiency with comprehensive risk mitigation. The correct approach involves a systematic and comprehensive evaluation of potential hazards across all National Grid operations, considering both immediate and long-term impacts. This includes identifying potential failure points in infrastructure, assessing the likelihood and severity of incidents, and developing proportionate mitigation strategies. This aligns with the principles of the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974 and the regulatory requirements set by the Office of Gas and Electricity Markets (Ofgem), which mandate that licensed energy companies must manage their networks safely and reliably. A proactive and thorough risk assessment is ethically imperative to prevent harm and legally required to maintain compliance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate operational costs without considering the potential for catastrophic failure or regulatory noncompliance would be professionally unacceptable. would violate the duty of care owed to employees, the public, and the environment, and could lead to severe penalties, reputational damage, and loss of license. Similarly, an approach that prioritizes only the most statistically probable low-impact risks, while neglecting less probable but high-consequence events, such as major infrastructure failure, would be a failure of due diligence. This overlooks the potential for systemic failures that could have devastating consequences, contrary to the precautionary principles embedded in UK safety legislation. Another incorrect approach might involve relying on outdated risk models or failing to incorporate new intelligence about emerging threats, such as cybersecurity risks or climate change impacts, thereby failing to meet the dynamic requirements of modern risk management. Professionals at National Grid should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape and the company's safety objectives. This involves establishing a clear scope for the risk assessment, engaging relevant stakeholders, including operational staff, safety experts, and potentially external consultants, and utilizing a structured methodology for hazard identification, risk analysis, and risk evaluation. The process should be iterative, with findings regularly reviewed and updated. Mitigation strategies should be prioritized based on their effectiveness in reducing risk to an acceptable level, considering both technical feasibility and economic viability, but always with safety and regulatory compliance as the paramount considerations. Question 9. Comparative studies suggest that effective risk assessment is crucial for maintaining operational integrity. For National Grid, when evaluating a proposed upgrade to its gas transmission network, which of the following approaches to risk assessment best aligns with regulatory expectations for critical infrastructure providers in the UK? Option A. Delegating the entire risk assessment process to external consultants without establishing clear internal oversight or validation of their findings. Option B. Conducting a thorough assessment that considers the potential for operational failures, their impact on public safety and environmental integrity, and the effectiveness of proposed mitigation measures against current and emerging threats. Option C. Prioritizing risk mitigation strategies that offer the most immediate cost savings, assuming that historical incident data is a sufficient predictor of future events. Option D. Focusing the risk assessment primarily on the speed of project completion to minimize disruption to ongoing operations, with safety considerations addressed only if explicitly mandated by a specific regulation. The correct answer is C. Prioritizing risk mitigation strategies that offer the most immediate cost savings, assuming that historical incident data is a sufficient predictor of future events. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because National Grid, as a critical infrastructure provider, operates under stringent regulatory oversight. Pressure to maintain operational efficiency and cost-effectiveness must be balanced against the paramount duty to ensure the safety and reliability of the energy supply, which directly impacts public well-being and national security. A failure in risk assessment can lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and most importantly, potential harm to the public. Careful judgment is required to identify, evaluate, and mitigate risks effectively, ensuring compliance with all relevant regulations. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and proactive risk assessment that integrates potential operational failures with their downstream consequences, considering both immediate and long-term impacts on safety, security, and environmental protection. This approach aligns with the principles of robust risk management expected of utility companies. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit and letter of regulations that mandate diligent oversight of critical infrastructure, such as those overseen by the Office of Gas and Electricity Markets, Ofgem, in the UK, which emphasizes the need for companies to manage their networks safely and reliably. This includes anticipating foreseeable risks and implementing appropriate controls, rather than reacting to incidents. An approach that focuses solely on immediate cost savings, without a thorough evaluation of potential safety or operational disruptions, is professionally unacceptable. This would represent a failure to uphold the duty of care owed to consumers and the public, potentially contravening regulatory requirements for network resilience and safety. Similarly, an approach that prioritizes short-term project completion over a detailed assessment of potential environmental impacts would be flawed. Such a stance could lead to breaches of environmental legislation and damage to National Grid's corporate social responsibility standing. Finally, an approach that relies on historical data without considering emerging threats, technological advancements would be insufficient. Modern risk assessment requires forward-looking analysis to address evolving challenges, such as cybersecurity threats or the impact of climate change on infrastructure. Professionals at National Grid should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape and the company's risk appetite. This involves establishing a systematic process for identifying all relevant risks, assessing their likelihood and impact, and developing mitigation strategies. The process should be iterative, with regular reviews and updates to reflect changing circumstances and new information. When evaluating different risk mitigation options, professionals must consider not only financial implications, but also their effectiveness in preventing incidents, ensuring compliance, and protecting stakeholders. Question 10. The risk matrix shows a number of potential operational hazards for National Grid, with some categorized as high and others as medium. Considering the company's commitment to safety and regulatory compliance, which approach best reflects responsible risk management? Option A. Implement robust mitigation strategies for all high and very high risks and develop plans for medium risks while monitoring low risks. Option B. Focus all immediate mitigation efforts on the medium risks, as these represent a balance of likelihood and impact. Option C. Allocate resources to address all identified risks with equal intensity, regardless of their position on the matrix. Option D. Prioritize addressing only the high risks, as these are the most severe, and defer action on all other categories. Correct answer is A. Implement robust mitigation strategies for all high and very high risks, and develop plans for medium risks while monitoring low risks. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for National Grid employees by requiring them to interpret a risk matrix in the context of operational safety and regulatory compliance. The challenge lies in moving beyond a superficial understanding of risk levels to applying that understanding in a way that directly informs decision-making and resource allocation, ensuring adherence to the stringent safety standards mandated by the UK's Health and Safety Executive, HSE, and relevant industry guidelines. The need to balance operational efficiency with the paramount importance of public and employee safety, while also considering potential regulatory scrutiny, demands careful judgment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves prioritizing mitigation strategies for risks identified as high or very high on the matrix, focusing on immediate and robust control measures. This aligns directly with the principles of the UK's Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974, which places a duty on employers to ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, the health, safety, and welfare at work of all their employees, and to protect others from risks to their health and safety arising out of or in connection with the conduct of their undertaking. Furthermore, the HSE's guidance on risk management emphasizes the need for proportionate control measures, with higher risks demanding more significant interventions. This approach ensures that National Grid is proactively addressing the most critical threats to its operations and stakeholders, thereby fulfilling its legal and ethical obligations. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on risks categorized as medium would be an ethical and regulatory failure. While medium risks require attention, neglecting high and very high risks would demonstrate a disregard for the severity of potential harm and a failure to meet the reasonably practicable standard of care. This could lead to serious incidents, regulatory enforcement action from the HSE, and reputational damage. Ignoring risks that fall outside the high or very high categories, even if they are low or medium, would also be professionally unsound. While the immediate focus should be on the most severe risks, a comprehensive risk management strategy requires a holistic view. Failing to monitor and manage lower-level risks could allow them to escalate over time, potentially becoming more significant threats. This approach lacks the foresight and continuous improvement expected in a safety-critical industry. Treating all identified risks with the same level of urgency, regardless of their categorization on the matrix, is inefficient and impractical. While a commitment to safety is crucial, resources are finite. A risk matrix is designed to help prioritize. Applying uniform, high-level mitigation to every risk would divert resources from where they are most critically needed, potentially leaving the highest risks inadequately addressed. This demonstrates a misunderstanding of effective risk management principles. Professional reasoning. Professionals at National Grid should approach risk assessment by first understanding the context and the implications of each risk level as defined by the company's established risk matrix, which should be informed by regulatory requirements. The decision-making process should then involve 1. Identifying and clearly categorizing all potential risks. 2. Using the risk matrix to prioritize these risks based on their likelihood and severity. 3. Developing and implementing proportionate control measures, with the most robust measures reserved for high and very high risks. 4. Establishing a system for regular review and monitoring of all risks, including those categorized as lower, to ensure ongoing effectiveness of controls and to identify any emerging threats. This systematic, prioritized approach ensures compliance with HSE regulations and upholds National Grid's commitment to safety. Question 11. Regulatory review indicates that National Grid is undertaking a significant upgrade to its network control systems. Considering the potential for operational disruptions and the need to maintain regulatory compliance, which approach to risk assessment for this project best aligns with the principles of robust infrastructure management and UK regulatory expectations? Option A. Relying primarily on a review of past network control system incidents to identify potential risks for the upgrade project. Option B. Conducting a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies potential system failures, assesses their impact on service delivery and safety, and develops mitigation strategies aligned with UK regulations and industry best practices. Option C. Utilizing informal discussions with experienced engineers to gauge potential risks associated with the system upgrade. Option D. Prioritizing risk mitigation strategies that offer the lowest immediate cost, even if they provide less comprehensive protection against potential failures. The correct answer is B. Conducting a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies potential system failures, assesses their impact on service delivery and safety, and develops mitigation strategies aligned with UK regulations and industry best practices. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because National Grid, as a critical infrastructure operator, faces stringent regulatory oversight. The challenge lies in balancing operational efficiency with the imperative to proactively identify and mitigate risks that could impact service delivery or public safety, all within the framework of the National Grid hiring assessment tests specified regulatory environment. Careful judgment is required to ensure that risk assessment processes are not merely a procedural formality, but a robust mechanism for safeguarding operations and compliance. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, forward-looking risk assessment that integrates potential operational disruptions with regulatory compliance obligations. This is professionally sound because it aligns with the principles of robust risk management expected of utility companies. Specifically, it necessitates identifying potential failure points in critical systems, assessing their likelihood and impact, and developing mitigation strategies that are not only operationally feasible, but also demonstrably compliant with relevant UK regulations and industry best practices, such as those promoted by SISI. This proactive stance ensures that National Grid can anticipate and address risks before they materialize, thereby maintaining service continuity and regulatory adherence. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on historical incident data fails to meet regulatory expectations for forward-looking risk management. While historical data is valuable, it does not adequately address emerging threats or novel operational challenges. This approach risks overlooking future vulnerabilities, leading to potential non-compliance and service disruptions. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes cost reduction over comprehensive risk identification is professionally unacceptable. Regulatory frameworks for critical infrastructure emphasize safety and reliability, which often necessitate investment in robust risk mitigation. A purely cost-driven approach can lead to underestimation of risks and inadequate preparedness, potentially resulting in significant financial and reputational damage, as well as regulatory penalties. A third incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or informal assessments, without a structured methodology, is also professionally deficient. This lacks the rigor and objectivity required for effective risk management and can lead to biased or incomplete risk profiles. Regulatory bodies expect documented, evidence-based risk assessments that can be audited and verified. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This includes defining the scope, identifying potential hazards and threats, analyzing the likelihood and impact of these risks, evaluating existing controls, and developing appropriate mitigation and contingency plans. This process must be informed by regulatory requirements, industry standards, and expert judgment, ensuring that all identified risks are systematically addressed to maintain operational resilience and regulatory compliance. Question 12. Consider a scenario where National Grid is undertaking a critical project to upgrade a substation component, and the project team is facing significant pressure to complete the installation ahead of schedule to meet regulatory compliance deadlines. The project manager is considering whether to proceed with the installation by relying on the team's extensive experience and assuming that all foreseeable risks are understood, or to conduct a full, documented risk assessment before commencing work. Option A. Proceed with the installation based on the team's experience, assuming that their collective knowledge is sufficient to manage any emergent risks. Option B. Prioritize meeting the deadline by commencing the installation immediately, with the intention of addressing any safety concerns that may arise during the process. Option C. Conduct a full, documented risk assessment to identify, evaluate, and control all potential hazards associated with the installation, regardless of the time pressure. Option D. Perform a brief, informal risk assessment focusing only on the most obvious and immediate dangers, and then proceed with the installation. The correct answer is C. Conduct a full, documented risk assessment to identify, evaluate, and control all potential hazards associated with the installation, regardless of the time pressure. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for National Grid employees due to the inherent conflict between operational efficiency and the imperative to maintain robust safety protocols. The pressure to meet demanding project timelines, especially in a critical infrastructure sector like energy, can create an environment where shortcuts might seem appealing. However, the regulatory framework governing National Grid, which aligns with UK legislation and industry best practices, such as those promoted by the Health and Safety Executive and relevant industry standards, places paramount importance on risk assessment and the mitigation of potential hazards. Failure to adhere to these principles can have severe consequences, including harm to personnel, damage to assets, and significant reputational damage, alongside potential legal and financial penalties. The correct approach involves a thorough and documented risk assessment process that proactively identifies potential hazards associated with the new substation component installation. This includes evaluating the likelihood and severity of each identified risk, and then developing and implementing appropriate control measures. This aligns directly with the legal obligations under the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974, which mandates employers to ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, the health, safety, and welfare at work of all their employees, and to conduct their undertaking in such a way as to ensure that persons not in their employment are not exposed to risks to their health or safety. Furthermore, industry guidance emphasizes a proactive, rather than reactive, approach to safety, making a comprehensive risk assessment a fundamental ethical and regulatory requirement. An incorrect approach of proceeding with installation without a formal risk assessment fails to meet the statutory duty of care. It demonstrates a disregard for potential hazards and relies on assumptions rather than evidence-based safety planning. This exposes National Grid and its employees to unacceptable risks and violates the principles of due diligence required by health and safety legislation. Another incorrect approach, that of conducting a superficial risk assessment that only considers obvious, immediate risks, is also professionally unacceptable. This approach is insufficient because it neglects to identify less apparent but potentially significant long-term or cascading risks. Effective risk assessment requires a comprehensive and systematic evaluation, considering all foreseeable scenarios, not just those that are immediately apparent. This failure to adequately identify and control risks would breach regulatory requirements for a thorough assessment. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed over safety, even if a risk assessment is nominally completed, is fundamentally flawed. The purpose of a risk assessment is to inform and guide safe working practices. If its findings are disregarded or downplayed in favor of expediency, the assessment becomes a mere formality, failing to fulfill its intended purpose and creating a significant ethical and regulatory breach. Professionals at National Grid should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape and internal safety policies. When faced with time pressures, The framework should emphasize the non-negotiable nature of safety. This involves a structured risk assessment process, followed by a clear communication of identified risks and control measures to all involved personnel. If the risk assessment reveals that the timeline cannot be met without compromising safety, the professional obligation is to escalate this concern through appropriate channels, advocating for a revised schedule that allows for safe execution, rather than cutting corners. Question 13. Benchmark analysis indicates that National Grid's operational resilience is a key focus for regulatory bodies. Considering the evolving landscape of cyber threats and their potential to impact physical energy infrastructure, which approach to risk assessment best aligns with the current regulatory framework and ethical obligations for critical national infrastructure operators? Option A. Conducting a comprehensive risk assessment that integrates potential cyber threats with their impact on physical infrastructure and operational continuity, informed by forward-looking threat intelligence and scenario planning. Option B. Relying primarily on historical incident data to identify and prioritize risks, assuming that past vulnerabilities are the most probable future threats. Option C. Delegating the entire risk assessment process and the definition of risk appetite to an external cybersecurity consultancy without significant internal oversight or strategic alignment. Option D. Focusing risk assessment efforts exclusively on threats with the highest immediate quantifiable financial impact, as this directly affects shareholder value. The correct answer is A. Conducting a comprehensive risk assessment that integrates potential cyber threats with their impact on physical infrastructure and operational continuity, informed by forward-looking threat intelligence and scenario planning. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because National Grid, as a critical infrastructure operator, faces significant regulatory scrutiny and public trust obligations. Balancing the need for operational efficiency with robust risk management, particularly concerning potential disruptions to energy supply, requires careful judgment. The regulatory framework for such entities emphasizes proactive identification and mitigation of risks that could impact service delivery and public safety. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, forward-looking risk assessment that integrates potential cyber threats with their impact on physical infrastructure and operational continuity. This aligns with regulatory expectations for critical national infrastructure to maintain resilience against evolving threats. Specifically, it adheres to guidelines that mandate a holistic view of risk, considering not just the likelihood of an event, but also its potential severity and the effectiveness of existing controls. This proactive stance ensures that National Grid can anticipate and prepare for a wide range of scenarios, thereby safeguarding its operations and the public. An approach that focuses solely on historical incident data, while useful for understanding past vulnerabilities, is insufficient. Regulatory frameworks for critical infrastructure demand a forward-looking perspective that anticipates emerging threats, such as novel cyber attack vectors or sophisticated state-sponsored actors, which may not be reflected in historical data. Failing to consider these future possibilities represents a significant regulatory and ethical lapse, as it leaves the organization exposed to unaddressed risks. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize only those risks with the highest immediate financial impact. While financial considerations are important, regulatory obligations for critical infrastructure extend beyond immediate financial loss to encompass the broader societal impact of service disruption, including public safety and national security. Overlooking risks that might have a lower immediate financial cost but a high potential for widespread disruption would be a failure to meet these broader responsibilities. Finally, an approach that relies on external consultants to solely define the risk appetite without internal validation and alignment with National Grid's strategic objectives is also flawed. Regulatory guidance often emphasizes the importance of internal ownership and understanding of risk management processes. While external expertise is valuable, the ultimate responsibility for setting and managing risk appetite rests with the organization's leadership, ensuring it is integrated with business strategy and operational realities. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk management framework that includes defining the context, understanding the operational environment and regulatory landscape, risk identification, brainstorming potential threats and vulnerabilities, risk analysis, assessing likelihood and impact, Risk evaluation, comparing risks against established criteria. Risk treatment, developing mitigation strategies. And ongoing monitoring and review. This iterative process ensures that risk management remains dynamic and responsive to changing circumstances. Question 14. The investigation demonstrates that a critical component in National Grid's transmission network is exhibiting signs of premature wear, potentially impacting its long-term reliability and safety. Given the immediate need to maintain network stability and the potential for significant disruption if the component fails, what is the most appropriate next step for National Grid's risk management team? Option A. Prioritize the most cost-effective solution for addressing the wear, assuming that historical maintenance practices have adequately managed similar issues in the past. Option B. Immediately initiate a replacement of the component using the quickest available method to prevent any potential failure, deferring a detailed risk assessment until after service is fully restored. Option C. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to evaluate the potential consequences of component failure, considering safety, environmental, regulatory, and operational impacts, and develop mitigation strategies based on the assessed risks. Option D. Focus on temporary measures to stabilize the component's performance, relying on expert opinion from long-serving engineers to gauge the immediate threat level without formal documentation. Correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to evaluate the potential consequences of component failure, considering safety, environmental, regulatory, and operational impacts, and develop mitigation strategies based on the assessed risks. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires National Grid to balance immediate operational needs with long-term strategic risk management, all while adhering to stringent regulatory requirements. The pressure to restore service quickly can lead to decisions that might overlook potential future vulnerabilities or compliance issues. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the chosen approach not only addresses the immediate problem, but also aligns with the company's overall risk appetite and regulatory obligations. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that considers the potential impact of the identified issue on safety, security, environmental protection, and regulatory compliance. This approach is right because it aligns with the principles of robust risk management expected of critical national infrastructure operators like National Grid. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit and likely letter of UK regulatory frameworks such as those overseen by the Office of Gas and Electricity Markets, Ofgem, which mandate that companies manage their networks safely and reliably, and to the Health and Safety Executive, HSE, regulations concerning operational safety. A thorough risk assessment ensures that all potential consequences are evaluated, enabling informed decision-making that prioritizes the most critical risks and ensures compliance with legal and ethical duties. An approach that prioritizes immediate restoration without a full risk assessment is incorrect because it bypasses essential due diligence. This could lead to overlooking latent defects or safety hazards that might cause future failures, posing risks to public safety and the environment, and potentially resulting in significant regulatory penalties from Ofgem or HSE. An approach that focuses solely on cost-effectiveness without adequately considering the identified risks is also incorrect. While cost is a factor, it cannot supersede safety and regulatory compliance. This failure to prioritize risk mitigation could lead to breaches of statutory duties and a loss of public trust. An approach that relies on historical precedent without reevaluating the current context is incorrect. Each incident is unique, and relying on past solutions without a fresh risk assessment might not address the specific nuances of the current problem, potentially leading to inadequate mitigation and future issues. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk management framework. This includes identifying the hazard or issue, assessing the likelihood and severity of potential harm, evaluating existing controls, determining the level of risk, and implementing further controls to reduce the risk to an acceptable level. This process must be documented, reviewed, and communicated to relevant stakeholders, ensuring that decisions are transparent, justifiable, and compliant with all applicable regulations and ethical standards. Question 15. The analysis reveals that National Grid is considering a new infrastructure project. Which of the following approaches to risk assessment best aligns with the regulatory framework and best practices for critical infrastructure operators in the UK? Option A. conducting a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies all potential hazards, evaluates their likelihood and impact, and develops proportionate mitigation plans with a focus on both probable and low probability, high-impact events. Option B, focusing only on risks that have a high probability of occurring, regardless of their potential severity. Option C, relying solely on historical incident data to identify risks, assuming that future risks will mirror past occurrences. Option D, prioritizing risk mitigation strategies that offer the most immediate cost savings, even if they do not fully address the highest potential impact risks. The correct answer is D, prioritizing risk mitigation strategies that offer the most immediate cost savings, even if they do not fully address the highest potential impact risks. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because National Grid, as a critical infrastructure operator, faces significant regulatory scrutiny and public expectation regarding the safety and reliability of its operations. Failure in risk assessment can have severe consequences, including operational disruptions, environmental damage, financial penalties, and reputational harm. The pressure to balance cost efficiency with robust safety measures requires careful judgment and adherence to established frameworks. The correct approach involves a systematic and comprehensive evaluation of potential risks, considering their likelihood and impact, and developing proportionate mitigation strategies. This aligns with the principles of good governance and regulatory compliance expected of companies like National Grid. Specifically, regulatory frameworks governing critical infrastructure often mandate proactive risk management, requiring companies to identify, assess, and control risks to ensure the safety and security of their assets and services. This approach demonstrates a commitment to operational integrity and stakeholder protection, which are paramount in the energy sector. An approach that prioritizes immediate cost savings over a thorough risk assessment is professionally unacceptable. This failure to adequately identify and mitigate potential hazards could lead to unforeseen incidents, resulting in greater long-term costs and potential breaches of regulatory obligations. Similarly, an approach that relies solely on historical data without considering emerging threats or changes in the operating environment is insufficient. Regulations often require forward-looking risk assessments that account for evolving technological, environmental, and security landscapes. Focusing only on the most probable risks while neglecting low probability, high-impact events is also a critical failure, as these can have catastrophic consequences. Professionals at National Grid should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific regulatory requirements for risk management in the energy sector. This involves identifying all potential hazards, assessing their risks using a defined methodology, e.g., qualitative or quantitative risk assessment, and then prioritizing mitigation efforts based on the assessed risk levels. The process should be iterative, with regular reviews and updates to reflect new information and changing circumstances. This structured approach ensures that decisions are evidence-based, compliant with regulations, and focused on maintaining the safety and resilience of National Grid's operation. Question 16. The evaluation methodology shows that National Grid is considering a new approach to assessing the risks associated with its electricity transmission network. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework and ethical obligations for a critical national infrastructure provider in the UK? Option A, a cost-driven risk assessment where potential mitigation measures are only implemented if they demonstrably reduce immediate operational expenses, without a thorough evaluation of their impact on safety or long-term reliability. Option B, a proactive, integrated risk assessment that considers a wide range of potential hazards, including operational failures, environmental impacts, and emerging threats like cyber attacks, with a focus on robust mitigation strategies and continuous review, informed by regulatory guidance from bodies like the HSE and Ofgem. Option C, a reactive risk assessment that primarily focuses on addressing issues that have historically caused minor disruptions, with the goal of meeting the minimum compliance requirements set by industry regulators. Option D, a risk assessment that relies solely on internal historical data, neglecting external expert opinions or potential future scenarios not yet reflected in past incidents. The correct answer is B, a proactive, integrated risk assessment that considers a wide range of potential hazards, including operational failures, environmental impacts, and emerging threats like cyber attacks, with a focus on robust mitigation strategies and continuous review, informed by regulatory guidance from bodies like the HSE and OFGEM. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because National Grid, as a critical infrastructure operator, faces a complex web of regulatory obligations and ethical considerations when assessing risks associated with its operations. The challenge lies in balancing the need for operational efficiency and cost-effectiveness with the paramount duty to ensure public safety, environmental protection, and the reliability of energy supply. A robust risk assessment methodology is crucial for identifying potential hazards, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and implementing appropriate mitigation strategies. This requires a deep understanding of the specific regulatory framework governing National Grid's activities, which in the UK context would primarily involve legislation and guidance from bodies like the Health and Safety Executive HSE, the Office of Gas and Electricity Markets OFGEM, and potentially environmental agencies. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, proactive, and evidence-based risk assessment that integrates regulatory compliance, stakeholder engagement, and a forward-looking perspective. This approach prioritizes the identification and mitigation of risks that could lead to significant harm or disruption, aligning with the principles of the UK's Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974, and the duties imposed by OFGEM regarding security of supply and consumer protection. It necessitates considering not only immediate operational risks, but also emerging threats, such as cybersecurity vulnerabilities or the impact of climate change on infrastructure. The ethical justification stems from the duty of care owed to the public, employees, and the environment, which is reinforced by regulatory requirements. An incorrect approach would be to adopt a reactive or purely compliance-driven risk assessment that only addresses known historical incidents or minimal regulatory thresholds. This fails to adequately anticipate future risks and could leave National Grid vulnerable to unforeseen events, potentially leading to breaches of regulatory duty, significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and most importantly, harm to individuals and the environment. Another incorrect approach would be to solely focus on cost reduction without a thorough assessment of the associated risks, as this could compromise safety and reliability, violating the core principles of responsible utility operation and regulatory oversight. A third incorrect approach might involve neglecting the input of relevant stakeholders, such as local communities or environmental groups, thereby missing critical perspectives that could inform a more complete risk picture and potentially lead to regulatory noncompliance or public opposition. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk management framework that includes defining the scope and objectives of the assessment, identifying hazards and risks through a variety of methods, e.g., haze-up studies, FME, expert judgment, analyzing and evaluating risks based on likelihood and consequence, developing and implementing control measures, and regularly reviewing and monitoring the effectiveness of these measures. This process must be underpinned by a strong understanding of the relevant regulatory landscape and a commitment to ethical conduct, ensuring that decisions are not only legally compliant but also socially responsible. Question 17. To address the challenge of integrating a novel energy storage technology into its existing grid infrastructure, National Grid is undertaking a new project. Which of the following approaches to risk assessment best aligns with the regulatory framework and ethical obligations for a company of its nature in the UK? Option A. Delegate the entire risk assessment process to an external consultancy firm with minimal internal review, to leverage specialized expertise and expedite the project timeline. Option B. Prioritize a risk assessment that focuses primarily on the immediate capital expenditure savings associated with the new technology, assuming historical data from similar, but not identical, projects is sufficient. Option C. Rely solely on the operational history of existing, less advanced energy storage systems within National Grid's portfolio, without specific consideration for the unique characteristics of the new technology or its proposed deployment site. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies potential hazards, analyzes their likelihood and impact across technical, environmental, and social dimensions, and develops proportionate mitigation strategies with ongoing monitoring and review. Correct answer is B. Prioritize a risk assessment that focuses primarily on the immediate capital expenditure savings associated with the new technology, assuming historical data from similar, but not identical, projects is sufficient. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because National Grid, as a critical infrastructure operator, faces significant regulatory scrutiny and public expectation regarding the safety and reliability of its operations. A failure to adequately assess and mitigate risks associated with a new energy storage project could lead to severe consequences, including operational disruptions, environmental damage, financial penalties, and reputational harm. The decision-making process requires a nuanced understanding of risk assessment methodologies and their application within the specific regulatory framework governing energy companies in the UK. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, multifaceted risk assessment that integrates technical, environmental, and social considerations. This approach is right because it aligns with the principles of robust risk management expected of regulated entities like National Grid. Specifically, it reflects the proactive stance mandated by the Health and Safety Executive, HSE, and the Office of Gas and Electricity Markets, OFGEM, which require companies to identify, assess, and control risks to prevent harm. This includes considering the potential for catastrophic failure, environmental impact, and public safety, and ensuring that mitigation strategies are proportionate and effective. Adherence to established industry standards and best practices, such as those promoted by the Energy Networks Association (ENA), further reinforces this approach. An approach that focuses solely on immediate cost savings without a thorough risk assessment is professionally unacceptable because it prioritizes short-term financial gain over long-term safety and compliance. This failure to adequately consider potential hazards and their consequences directly contravenes the duty of care owed to the public and the environment, and would likely violate regulatory requirements for risk management. An approach that relies on historical data from similar projects, without accounting for the unique characteristics of the new technology or site, is also professionally unacceptable. While historical data is valuable, it may not capture novel risks or the specific environmental and geological conditions of the new project. This oversight could lead to an underestimation of risks and the implementation of inadequate control measures, potentially resulting in unforeseen incidents. This neglects the principle of continuous improvement and adaptation to new information and technologies, which is crucial in a dynamic sector like energy. An approach that delegates the entire risk assessment process to external consultants without internal oversight or validation is professionally unacceptable. While external expertise is important, National Grid retains ultimate responsibility for the safety and compliance of its operations. A lack of internal engagement and critical review of the consultant's findings could lead to a superficial assessment or the acceptance of recommendations that are not fully understood or integrated into the company's operational framework. This abdication of responsibility undermines effective governance and accountability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the project's objectives and the relevant regulatory landscape. This should be followed by a systematic process of hazard identification, risk analysis, and risk evaluation, involving diverse internal expertise and, where necessary, external specialists. Mitigation strategies should be developed, implemented, and continuously monitored. Regular reviews and updates to the risk assessment are essential, especially when new information becomes available or operational conditions change. This iterative process ensures that risk management remains dynamic and effective, aligning with the principles of due diligence and responsible operation. Question 18. The review process indicates that a critical gas network maintenance task at National Grid is scheduled for completion within a tight timeframe. While the team has significant experience with similar tasks, there is a possibility of encountering unexpected ground conditions that could impact the excavation and pipe repair. Which approach best aligns with National Grid's regulatory obligations and commitment to safety? Option A. Prioritize completing the task within the deadline, and if any safety concerns emerge, pause the work and address them reactively. Option B. Conduct a detailed risk assessment, identifying potential hazards associated with the excavation and pipe repair, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and developing specific mitigation strategies before commencing work. Option C. Proceed with the maintenance as scheduled, relying on the team's experience to manage any unforeseen issues that may arise during the excavation. Option D. Delegate the risk assessment entirely to the on-site supervisor, assuming they have the most up-to-date knowledge of the specific site conditions. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the maintenance as scheduled, relying on the team's experience to manage any unforeseen issues that may arise during the excavation. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for National Grid employees due to the inherent conflict between operational efficiency and the imperative to maintain robust safety protocols. The pressure to meet deadlines, coupled with the potential for unforeseen technical issues, can create an environment where shortcuts might seem appealing. However, the regulatory framework governing the energy sector, particularly concerning critical infrastructure like gas networks, mandates a rigorous approach to risk assessment and management. Failure to adhere to these standards can have severe consequences, including safety incidents, environmental damage, and significant reputational harm to National Grid. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and documented risk assessment that proactively identifies potential hazards associated with the planned maintenance, evaluates their likelihood and impact, and establishes appropriate mitigation strategies. This aligns with the principles of due diligence and the proactive safety culture expected of companies operating in regulated industries. Specifically, adherence to the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974 and relevant industry guidance from bodies like the Energy Networks Association, ENA, would necessitate such a structured approach. This ensures that all foreseeable risks are considered and that control measures are in place before work commences, thereby safeguarding personnel, the public, and the environment. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the maintenance without a thorough risk assessment, relying solely on past experience or assuming minimal risk. This bypasses critical regulatory requirements designed to prevent accidents and demonstrates a disregard for the potential consequences of unforeseen events. Such an action could violate the employer's duty of care under the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974, which requires employers to ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, the health, safety, and welfare at work of all their employees. Another incorrect approach would be to conduct a superficial risk assessment that fails to identify all significant hazards or underestimates their potential impact. This would also fall short of regulatory expectations and could lead to inadequate control measures, exposing National Grid and the public to undue risk. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. This involves understanding the scope of the task, consulting relevant safety procedures and regulations, engaging with experienced personnel to identify potential risks, and documenting the entire risk assessment process. If uncertainties remain or significant risks are identified, the decision should be to delay the operation until adequate mitigation measures can be implemented and verified, rather than proceeding with an unacceptable level of risk. Question 19. What factors determine the effectiveness of National Grid's approach to identifying and mitigating risks associated with its critical infrastructure operations under UK regulatory frameworks? Option A. The comprehensiveness of the risk identification and analysis process, including consideration of both immediate and long-term threats, and the integration of control measures aligned with HSE and Ofgem guidelines. Option B. The extent to which immediate cost-saving opportunities are prioritized in operational planning, even if it means deferring some risk mitigation activities. Option C. The reliance on anecdotal evidence and past operational experiences without formal risk assessment methodologies or regulatory guidance. Option D. The focus on managing only those risks that have historically resulted in significant incidents, ignoring potential new or emerging threats. The correct answer is A. The comprehensiveness of the risk identification and analysis process, including consideration of both immediate and long-term threats, and the integration of control measures aligned with HSE and Ofgem guidelines. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because National Grid, as a critical infrastructure operator, faces significant regulatory scrutiny and public expectation regarding the safety and reliability of its operations. A failure in risk assessment can lead to severe consequences, including operational disruptions, environmental damage, financial penalties, and reputational harm. The complexity arises from balancing competing priorities, such as cost-effectiveness, operational efficiency, and the paramount need for safety and compliance with stringent regulations. The decision-making process requires a deep understanding of the specific regulatory framework governing energy infrastructure in the UK, including the Health and Safety Executive (HSE) guidelines and relevant OFGEM requirements. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and systematic identification, analysis, and evaluation of potential risks associated with National Grid's operation, followed by the implementation of appropriate control measures. This aligns with the principles of the UK's Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974, which places a duty on employers to ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, the health, safety, and welfare at work of all their employees and others who may be affected by their undertaking. Furthermore, it reflects the proactive risk management expectations set by OFGEM, which requires licensed electricity and gas companies to manage their networks safely and reliably. A robust risk assessment process, incorporating both qualitative and quantitative methods where appropriate, ensures that potential hazards are understood, their likelihood and severity are estimated, and mitigation strategies are developed to reduce risks to an acceptable level, thereby fulfilling legal and ethical obligations. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on immediate cost savings without a thorough risk assessment is an incorrect approach. This would violate the duty of care under the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974 and potentially OFGEM's safety and reliability requirements. Such an approach prioritizes short-term financial gains over long-term safety and operational integrity, which is ethically unsound and legally precarious. Prioritizing only the most visible or frequently reported risks, while neglecting less obvious but potentially catastrophic ones, is also an incorrect approach. Effective risk management requires a holistic view, considering all potential hazards, regardless of their perceived frequency or visibility. This selective approach could lead to unforeseen incidents and breaches of regulatory compliance, as it fails to meet the comprehensive duty of care expected of a company like National Grid. Relying exclusively on historical incident data without considering emerging threats or changes in operational environment is another incorrect approach. While historical data is valuable, it may not capture new vulnerabilities introduced by technological advancements, climate change impacts, or evolving security threats. A forward-looking and adaptive risk assessment is essential to maintain safety and compliance in a dynamic operational landscape, as mandated by the continuous improvement principles embedded in UK safety legislation. Professional reasoning. Professionals at National Grid should employ a structured risk management framework that is aligned with UK regulatory requirements. This involves 1. Hazard identification, systematically identifying all potential hazards across all operational areas. 2. Risk analysis, assessing the likelihood and severity of each identified hazard. 3. Risk evaluation, determining the acceptability of the identified risks. 4. Risk treatment, developing and implementing control measures to mitigate unacceptable risks. 5. Monitoring and review, regularly reviewing the effectiveness of control measures and updating the risk assessment as necessary. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed by a comprehensive understanding of potential risks and are compliant with legal and ethical obligations, safeguarding both people and the environment. Question 20. Stakeholder feedback indicates that some operational decisions at National Grid are perceived as prioritizing short-term financial gains over long-term network resilience and customer service quality. Considering the regulatory framework governing National Grid's operations, which approach to assessing these concerns would be most appropriate? Option A. Initiate a review of historical performance data to identify past successes, without actively seeking new information on emerging risks or future challenges. Option B. Focus the assessment solely on addressing the specific complaints received from the most vocal stakeholder groups, without a broader evaluation of systemic risks. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that quantifies potential impacts on network reliability, safety, and customer satisfaction, and evaluates mitigation strategies against regulatory requirements and strategic objectives. Option D. Implement immediate cost-cutting measures across all operational departments to address the financial concerns raised by stakeholders, deferring any detailed analysis of long-term impacts. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that quantifies potential impacts on network reliability, safety, and customer satisfaction, and evaluates mitigation strategies against regulatory requirements and strategic objectives. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because National Grid, as a regulated utility, must balance the interests of various stakeholders, including customers, investors, and the public, while adhering to stringent regulatory requirements. The feedback highlights a potential disconnect between operational realities and stakeholder perceptions, necessitating a robust risk assessment to identify and mitigate any emerging issues. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the risk assessment process is comprehensive, objective, and aligned with National Grid's strategic objectives and regulatory obligations. Correct approach involves a systematic and data-driven evaluation of potential risks that could impact National Grid's ability to deliver its services reliably and affordably, while also considering environmental and social impacts. This approach requires engaging with relevant internal and external stakeholders to gather diverse perspectives, utilizing established risk management frameworks, and prioritizing risks based on their likelihood and potential impact. Regulatory justification stems from the need to comply with frameworks such as the Electricity and Gas Standards of Performance regulations, which mandate that National Grid operates efficiently and reliably, and to meet reporting requirements under the Companies Act and other relevant legislation that necessitate transparent risk disclosure. Ethically, it aligns with the duty of care owed to customers and the broader public interest. An approach that focuses solely on immediate cost savings without a thorough risk assessment would be ethically and regulatorily flawed. It fails to consider the long-term consequences of underinvestment or operational shortcuts, potentially leading to service disruptions, safety incidents, or environmental damage, all of which would violate regulatory standards and stakeholder trust. Similarly, an approach that prioritizes only the most visible or vocal stakeholder concerns, neglecting less vocal but equally critical risks, would be incomplete and could lead to regulatory noncompliance and reputational damage. Ignoring the potential for new technological risks or evolving regulatory landscapes would also represent a failure in due diligence, as it would not adequately prepare National Grid for future challenges. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the scope and objectives of the risk assessment. This involves identifying all relevant risk categories: operational, financial, strategic, regulatory, environmental, social, etc., gathering comprehensive data from multiple sources, and employing a structured methodology for risk identification, analysis, and evaluation. The process should be iterative, allowing for continuous monitoring and review of identified risks and the effectiveness of mitigation strategies. Collaboration and communication with all relevant parties are crucial throughout the process to ensure buy-in and a holistic understanding of the risk landscape.